You won Alone season 6, and I think are still considered to be one of, if not the most successful survivor on that show. So let's go back. Let's look at the big picture. Can you tell me about the show Alone? How does it work?
Yeah, it's a show where they take 10 individuals and each person gets 10 items off of a list. Basic items would be an axe, a saw, a frying pan, some pretty basic stuff. And then they send them all, drop them off all in the woods with a few cameras. And so the people are actually alone. There's not a crew or anything. And then you basically live there as long as you can, and so the person that lasts the longest, once the second place person taps out, they come and get you, and that individual wins. So it's a pretty legit challenge. They drop you off, helicopter flies out, and you're not going to get your next meal until you make it happen. So
You have to figure out the shelter, you have to figure out the source of food, and then it gets colder and colder because I guess they drop you out at a moment where it's going into the winter.
yeah, they typically do it in temperate, colder climates, things like that, and they start in September, October. So time's ticking when they drop you off, and yeah, the pressure's on. You get overwhelmed with all the things you have to do right away. Like, oh man, I'm not going to eat again until I actually shoot or catch something. Got to build a shelter. It's pretty overwhelming. Figure your whole location out. But it's interesting because once you're there a little while, you kind of get into well, at least for me, it did. There was like a week, or maybe not a week, but that I was kind of a little more annoyed with things. It's like, oh, my site sucks. Sucks. And then you kind of accept it. Like, you know what? It is what it is. No amount of complaining is gonna do anybody any good. So I'm just gonna make it happen. And so then, or do my best to. And then I felt like I got in a zone, and I felt like I was right back in kind of Siberia or in that headspace. And I found I actually really enjoyed it. I'd been a little bit out of, I guess you call it, the game, because I had child, and so when we had our daughter, we came back to the States, and then a bunch of things happened, and we didn't end up going back to Russia. So there've been a couple years that I was just we were raising the little girl and boy then, and then
So you've gotten a little soft.
so I was like, did I got a little soft?
You have to figure that out.
But then it was fun how, like, after just some days there, I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm at home now. And then it was like you're kind of in that flow state, and it was
Actually, there's a few moments like when you left the ladder up or with the moose that you kind of screwed up a little bit.
Oh yeah.
How do you go from that moment of like frustration to the moment of acceptance?
I mean, the more you put yourself in life in positions that are kind of outside your comfort zone or push your abilities, the more often you're going to screw up. And then
Yeah.
the more opportunity you have to learn from that. And then, to be honest, it's kind of funny, but you almost get to a position where you don't feel that uncomfortable. It's not unexpected. You kind of expect you're going to mess up here and there. I remember particularly with the moose, the first moose I saw, I had a great shot at it, but I had a hard time judging distance because it was in a mud flat, which means it's hard to tell yardage, because you're usually typically going by trees or markers, be like, oh, I'm probably 30 yards away. This was a giant moose, and he was 40 something yards away, and I estimated that he was 30 something yards away, so I was way off and shot and dropped between his legs. And then I realized I had not grabbed my quiver, so I only had one shot, and I just watched him turn around and walk off. But I was struck initially with, like, I actually noticed how unmad I was. I was like, oh, I was like, that was awesome. That was like seeing a dinosaur. That was really cool. And then I was like, oh, what an idiot. How'd I miss? But then I was like, but it made me that much more determined to make it happen again. It was like, okay, nobody's going to make this happen except myself. So you can't complain. It wouldn't have done me any good to go back and mope about it. And so then I was like, I had a thought. I was like, oh, I remember the native guys telling me they used to like build these giant fences and funnel game into certain areas and stuff. And I was like, man, that's a lot of calories, but I have to make that happen again now. So I kind of went out there and tried that. And that was kind of a attempt at something too. It could have failed or not worked, but sure enough, it worked. And the opportunity came again. The moose came wandering along, and I was able to get it. But being able to take failure, the sooner you can, the better. Accept it and then learn from it is kind of a muscle you have to exercise a little bit.
Well, it's interesting because in this case, the cost of failure is like you're not going to be able to eat.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, the most interesting thing about that show was how high the stakes felt, because it didn't feel, you didn't tell yourself you're on a show. At least I didn't. You just felt like you're going to starve to death if you don't make this happen. And so the stakes felt so high, and it was an interesting thing to tap into, because I mean, so many of our ancestors probably all just dealt with that on a regular basis, but it's something that we're all the modern amenities and such and food security that we don't deal with. And it was interesting to tap into what a kind of a peak mental experience that is when you really, really need something to survive. And then it happens. You can't imagine. I mean, that's what all our dopamine and receptors are tuned for that experience in particular. So it was pretty awesome. But the pressure felt very on. Like I always felt the pressure of providing or starving.
And then there's the situation when you left the ladder up,
right?
And you needed fat, and what is it? The Wolverine needs some of the fat,
right? Yeah. Well, it was. When I got the moose, I was so happy. The most joy I could almost experience, maxed out. But I didn't think I won at that point. I never thought like, oh, that's my ticket to victory. I thought, holy crap, it's going to be me against somebody else that gets a moose now, and we're going to be here 6-8 months, who knows how long. And so I can't be here 6-8 months and still lose. So I've got to outproduce somebody else with a moose. So I had all that in my head. And I already was, of course, pretty thin. And so I was just like, man, if somebody else gets a moose, I'm still going to be behind. And so everything felt like precious to me. And I had found a plastic jug, and I put a whole bunch of the moose's fat in this plastic jug and set it up on a little shelf. And I thought, oh, you know what? If a bear comes, I'll probably hear it and I'll come out and be able to shoot it. So I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and I went out, and I was like, where's that jug? And then I started looking around, and then I was like, wait a second, what are all these prints? And then I started looking around, and it took a second to dawn on me, because I haven't interacted with Wolverines very often in life. And I was like, oh, those are Wolverine tracks. And he was just so much sneakier than Bear would have been or something. So it kind of surprised me, and he took off with that jug of fat. And so then I went from feeling pretty good about myself to like, now I'm losing again against whoever, this other person is with a moose. So I again, kind of the pressure came back to, oh no, I got to produce again. It wasn't the end of the world. And I think they may have exaggerated a little bit how little fat I had left. I still had, a moose has a lot of fat, but it did make me feel like I was at a disadvantage again. And so, yeah, that was pretty intense, because those Wolverines, they're bold little animals, and he was basically saying, no, this is my moose. And I had to counter his claims.
Well, they're really, really smart. They figure out a way to get to places really effectively. Wolverines are like fascinating in that way.
Mm-hmm.